This is the unknown zone, where truth hides between silence and signal, where the greatest victories were never seen and the most powerful weapons were not bombs, but minds. In the chaos of World War II, a few men and women waged a war the world never saw, a war of numbers, logic, and secrecy. They fought an enemy that spoke in riddles and wrote in electricity. And in the quiet rooms of an English mansion, they changed the course of history forever. This is the Enigma Code, the secret that won the war. In the years between the two world wars, Germany rebuilt itself with machines. Among them was one small enough to fit on a desk, yet powerful enough to guard an empire. It was called Enigma, a cipher device of wheels and wires that could turn language into darkness. At first, it was a tool for banks and businessmen. By the mid-1930s, it had become the heartbeat of the German military. Every order, every report, every whisper between command posts passed through its circuits of metal and electricity. Each day, its settings changed. Each message emerged as nonsense. To anyone who intercepted it, Enigma was unbreakable. The machine's secret lay in its rotors, 3 drums that rotated with every key pressed. A single letter could transform into another, and with every keystroke, the wiring shifted again. Over 26 letters, 26 possibilities, multiplied by hundreds of combinations every second. If one guessed the daily setting wrong, the message dissolved into chaos. To German commanders, Enigma was invincible. To their enemies, it became an obsession. Across Europe, radio operators listened to the static that carried German signals through the night. They copied lines of meaningless letters onto paper. For most, it was noise. For a handful of mathematicians, it was a challenge, whispered from the enemy's mind. The first to accept it were not British or American. They were Polish. In 1932, a small team at the Polish Cipher Bureau began studying intercepted German messages. They had no key, no manuals, only patience and imagination. Among them was a young mathematician named Marian Rejewski. He realized that the Enigma's logic could be expressed in mathematics, that patterns of wiring and motion could be described by equations. For the first time, cryptography became a science. Through painstaking analysis, Rejewski and his colleagues, Jerzy Różycki and Henryk Cegielski, built a replica of the German machine. They called it the Polish Enigma. It looked the same, sounded the same, but its purpose was opposite, not to hide messages, but to expose them. By 1938, the German army had increased Enigma's complexity, adding rotors, changing procedures, expanding possibilities beyond imagination. The Polish team could still follow, but the race was becoming hopeless. They knew war was coming, and they would not face it alone. In July 1939, only weeks before the invasion of Poland, the Poles invited 2 secret delegations, one from France, one from Britain, to a meeting near Warsaw. There, in a guarded room, they revealed everything: blueprints, notes, machines. They handed over the key to Germany's greatest secret. For the British, that meeting was the birth of their future code-breaking empire. When Poland fell, its mathematicians fled through France, carrying fragments of their work. Some reached Britain, others vanished into the chaos of war, but their discovery survived. And in an English country estate soon to be surrounded by barbed wire and secrecy, a new chapter began. That estate was Bletchley Park, an ordinary mansion in Buckinghamshire that would become the center of the most secret war ever fought. There, linguists, chess champions and mathematicians would pick up the threads left by the poles and try to finish what they had begun. For them, Enigma was not just a puzzle. It was an opponent. Intelligent, relentless, changing its moves every day. Each morning at dawn, the Germans reset the machine's internal wiring, creating a new code space of over 150 trillion possibilities. Every message intercepted after sunrise was unreadable by yesterday's logic. The Codebreakers had 24 hours to win, and at midnight, the battlefield reset. Their weapon was not steel, but thought. Their front line was paper and ink. Their trenches were filled with silence. Inside Bletchley Park, the first arrivals worked in makeshift huts. The air smelled of damp wood and hot tea. Typewriters clacked through the night as clerks transcribed endless strings of letters. A, Q, F, X, P, H, Z, W, O, M, N, R. Nothing made sense until it did. They called their first breakthroughs cribs, guessed fragments of real text hidden inside gibberish. A weather report, a salutation, a repeated word. From those tiny anchors, they began to reverse engineer the machine's daily settings. Each success was temporary, each failure erased by midnight. But progress came, letter by letter. Among the first recruits was a quiet Cambridge mathematician with a stammer and an unconventional mind, Alan Turing. He looked at the problem differently. Where others saw endless combinations, he saw process, patterns of movement that could be mechanized. He imagined a machine that could test Enigma settings faster than any human brain. It would not think like a man. It would search like a machine. The idea would soon become the bomb, the mechanical ancestor of the computer. But that is a story still waiting beyond the door of Hut 8. For now, the Codebreakers of Bletchley Park faced the same impossibility that had haunted the poles. Each morning, they listened to the enemy's confidence broadcast across Europe. Each night, they tried to break it. They worked in silence, knowing that every line they solved might save lives they would never meet. They could not speak of their victories. They could not even tell one another what they had achieved. Secrecy was absolute. The war of machines had become a war of minds. And inside the quiet rooms of Bletchley Park, the unbreakable code was beginning to tremble. Bletchley Park did not look like the heart of an intelligence empire. It was a quiet country mansion of red brick and ivy, surrounded by green lawns and old trees. Yet behind its doors, the most brilliant minds in Britain gathered under a single purpose: to break the unbreakable. In the early months of 1940, Britain stood alone. France had fallen, and the threat of invasion hung over the island. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them. Every movement of those submarines was directed by encrypted radio. If the Allies could read those messages, they could save thousands of lives. But the Enigma machine still guarded its secrets. The men and women who arrived at Bletchley Park were not soldiers. They were mathematicians, linguists, and scholars. Some had been recruited from Oxford and Cambridge, others from government departments. There were chess champions, crossword experts, professors, and clerks. They were told little of their mission, except that it was vital and that they must never speak of it outside the walls. The estate was divided into huts, small wooden buildings numbered and scattered across the grounds. Each hut became a world of its own. Hut 4 dealt with naval signals. Hut 6 worked on Army and Air Force traffic. Hut 8, under Alan Turing, targeted the German Navy, the most complex and deadly branch of Enigma communications. The atmosphere was one of intense secrecy and constant exhaustion. The days blurred into nights. The only measure of time was the rhythm of intercepts arriving from listening stations across Britain. Operators called them fish, and they came in endless streams of nonsense. Each message had to be recorded, logged, and distributed to the right hut. Every morning brought a new challenge, a new configuration of rotors, plugboard cables, and chaos. The Codebreakers worked with logic and intuition. They searched for patterns that could reveal the machine's settings. But Enigma was designed to leave no clues. For every letter typed, a rotor turned, shifting the wiring. A single mistake in setting meant total failure. By hand, it would take centuries to test all possibilities. Alan Turing knew that only a machine could defeat a machine. He began designing a device capable of testing thousands of Enigma settings automatically. He based his concept on earlier Polish work, but expanded it beyond anything that had come before. He called it the bomb. The bomb was a towering mechanism of rotating drums and electrical circuits. Each drum represented a rotor from the Enigma machine. As they turned, the machine tested combinations, searching for a setting that matched a known piece of plain text, a crib. If one line of logic failed, the bomb moved instantly to the next, never tiring, never doubting. The first bomb, named Victory, was installed at Bletchley Park in March 1940. It filled an entire room with noise, the clatter of relays, the hum of motors, and the steady rhythm of progress. By mid-year, more bombs were operating across Britain, their combined effort reducing weeks of human work to hours. Each successful decryption revealed fragments of German operations, weather reports, supply lists, troop orders. At first, the intelligence was sparse, but as more machines came online and new techniques evolved, the flow of information became a torrent. The Codebreakers called it ultra, intelligence so secret that only a handful of people outside Bletchley even knew it existed. Every decoded message carried a warning label: Most Secret, Ultra. Even senior generals received reports without being told their origin. To protect the source, the Allies sometimes allowed German attacks to proceed, sacrificing lives rather than reveal that the code was broken. It was a moral burden none of the Codebreakers could discuss. Among the thousands who worked at Bletchley were women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, known as the Wrens. They operated the bombs, maintained the machines, and managed communications. Many were barely out of school. They sat in long rows through the night, watching the drums spin, waiting for a signal lamp to flash. A brief spark of success amid endless repetition. Outside the huts, life at Bletchley was oddly domestic. There were bicycles leaning against the walls, tea breaks in the gardens, and the constant buzz of typewriters. But beneath the surface, the pressure was immense. Every message decoded could mean the difference between a convoy saved or sunk, a battle won or lost. The most crucial breakthrough came when the Codebreakers managed to read German naval Enigma, the lifeline of the U-boat fleet. By tracking transmissions from submarines, the Allies began rerouting convoys safely through the Atlantic. Within months, the U-boat losses rose sharply. The silent war beneath the waves was turning. Turing's team continued refining the bombs, building faster versions, and inventing new methods to exploit weaknesses in the German procedures. Whenever the Germans changed their encryption settings, the Codebreakers adapted. The war had become a duel of intelligence. Yet, despite their successes, the men and women of Bletchley Park remained unknown to the world. They could not speak of their work, even to family. When the war ended, they would return to civilian life in silence, their achievements locked behind government secrecy for decades. But in those early years, as the bombs fell over London and ships burned in the Atlantic, the work continued. They lived in shadows so others could live in light. Inside Hut 8, Alan Turing often sat alone, surrounded by stacks of intercepts and notes. He was methodical, tireless, and strange in his habits, drinking tea from a single mug he locked to a radiator, wearing his gas mask to avoid pollen during allergy season. To his colleagues, he was brilliant and distant, a man whose thoughts moved faster than speech. But to the war, he was indispensable. By 1941, the bombs had turned Bletchley Park into the beating heart of Allied intelligence. Messages that once seemed impossible now arrived decoded within hours. From these fragments of intercepted text, Allied commanders learned of German troop movements, supply routes, and naval strategies. In war rooms across London, decisions were made not on guesswork, but on knowledge. Knowledge stolen from Enigma's electric brain. And yet, even as victory approached, the Codebreakers knew their war would never be known. They worked without medals, without recognition, bound by the Official Secrets Act. Their reward was silence. The walls of Bletchley Park held the greatest secret of the 20th century. And for now, that secret still belonged to the night. The sound of progress at Bletchley Park was not a cheer or a shout. It was the mechanical rhythm of turning drums, the steady hum of electricity, the tapping of keys, the scratch of pencil on paper. In those small wooden huts, the world's first digital war was being fought, not with rifles or bombs, but with logic and gears. Alan Turing moved through the maze of huts with quiet intensity. He was 28 years old, thin, often unshaven, and perpetually lost in thought. To most, he seemed absent-minded, but to those who worked beside him, he was something else entirely. The man who thought like a machine. Turing had arrived at Bletchley in 1939, a mathematician from Cambridge whose papers on computation were so abstract that few people truly understood them. He believed that any problem could be solved by following a sequence of logical steps, what he called a universal machine. When he saw the Enigma Code, he recognized it not just as a cipher, but as a process. And processes, he believed, could be replicated and reversed. The Polish Codebreakers had already designed a mechanical aid called the bomba, which tested possible rotor settings using electrical circuits. But the German procedures had grown too complex. To defeat this new enigma, Turing needed something faster, smarter, and more flexible. A machine that could reason, not merely repeat. He began sketching designs for what would become known as the bomb. The idea was elegant. Instead of guessing enigma settings one by one, the bomb would use logic to eliminate impossibilities. Each drum represented an enigma rotor, wired so that every rotation simulated a potential configuration. If one combination failed, the current moved instantly to the next. It was the physical embodiment of deduction, a machine built to think through chaos. The project demanded secrecy and precision. Turing worked alongside engineer Gordon Welchman, who improved the design by adding a diagonal board that allowed the bomb to test multiple logical chains simultaneously. The result was a machine the size of a wardrobe, filled with dozens of spinning rotors and thousands of wires. When it ran, it filled the air with a roar like a distant storm. The first bomb was constructed by the British Tabulating Machine Company in Letchworth. It was powered by electric motors, its metal drums painted black and red. When the switch was thrown, the room vibrated with its rhythm. To the women who operated it, the bomb seemed alive. Rows of indicator lamps blinked rapidly, scanning through millions of possibilities each minute. When a circuit reached a possible match, a stop, the light froze. Operators noted the position, then handed it to cryptanalysts for testing. Most stops were false leads, but each one narrowed the field. Hours of repetition, days of noise, until a pattern emerged that made sense. By late 1940, Bletchley Park had several bombs running day and night. Each one saved time, and time in war meant life. Every decryption shortened the unseen distance between convoy and ambush, between mission and disaster. Every message read before the enemy acted meant ships saved, soldiers warned, families spared telegrams of loss. But Turing's task was more than mechanical. It was psychological. He had to predict how human beings set their machines, the habits of operators, the shortcuts they used, the laziness that left clues. Even perfect technology depended on imperfect men. He learned that many German operators used the same greeting words, the same phrases. He turned those small human flaws into entry points for the bombs to exploit. The Germans believed Enigma was mathematically unbreakable. They were right, but it was human nature, not mathematics, that betrayed them. Each night, the huts of Bletchley echoed with a strange mixture of science and intuition. Messages poured in from radio intercepts across the world. Each was logged, stamped, distributed to the huts. The operators of the bombs worked in shifts, hands on the switches, eyes on the lamps. Many were young women barely in their 20s. They were told only that their work was vital and that it must remain secret forever. They lived between monotony and revelation, never knowing which flicker of light would alter the course of war. Turing, meanwhile, kept refining his methods. He was fascinated by patterns beyond encryption, the structure of thought itself. He filled notebooks with equations describing logic and memory, predicting how machines could one day simulate reasoning. What he built at Bletchley was not just a weapon. It was a prototype of something greater, the first glimpse of artificial intelligence. By 1941, the bombs had transformed intelligence gathering. Thousands of intercepts were decrypted each week. The British Admiralty began routing convoys based on Enigma traffic, turning the Atlantic into a chessboard where the Allies could see the opponent's moves. For the first time, the hunters became the hunted. But the work was relentless. Every night, the Germans changed their settings. Every morning, the bombs had to start again. The race never ended, and mistakes could erase days of progress. Despite the stress, the atmosphere at Bletchley was one of quiet brilliance. Disagreements were common, but ego had little place. Everyone knew they were part of something larger than themselves. They lived on rationed food, bicycles, and secrecy. Their friendships were forged in silence. Outside the walls, the war raged. Cities burned, families scattered. But inside, there was a calm intensity, a sense that victory depended on their pencils and patience. Turing rarely spoke of emotion, but those who worked with him saw the toll. He carried the weight of failure personally. When messages couldn't be solved in time, when convoys were lost, he blamed himself. He wrote in one letter, "Sometimes it is the silence that kills us, not the noise." The more he worked, the further he drifted from the ordinary world. He ran long distances across the countryside to clear his mind. He repaired his bicycle with bits of wire. He solved equations in his head while waiting for tea. He was, by all accounts, impossible to understand and impossible to replace. By the end of 1941, the bombs had become the backbone of Allied intelligence. New machines were being built every month, each one faster, louder, and more capable than the last. The network of code breaking expanded to thousands of people, all bound by silence. The information extracted from Enigma was given the code name Ultra. It was guarded more tightly than any other secret in the war. Few outside the highest levels of command even knew Bletchley existed. To protect it, the Allies invented cover stories for every success. When a German ship was ambushed, it was explained as coincidence. When an air raid was prevented, it was said to be luck. In this way, Turing's work remained invisible. An entire victory fought in the shadows. But the secrecy that preserved Bletchley's power also doomed its heroes to anonymity. When the war ended, the Codebreakers would scatter, forbidden to speak of what they had done. Turing himself would return to Cambridge unrecognized, uncelebrated, carrying a mind that had changed history. For now, however, the bombs continued their rhythm. The machines hummed through the night, solving puzzles that only existed for a single day before vanishing into new ones. It was the sound of unseen war, mechanical, precise, endless. And in that sound was victory, because for every Enigma message broken, a battle was redirected, a ship was spared, a life was saved. The machine that Turing built had begun as a mathematical dream. It ended as the quiet heart of Allied power. By 1942, the rhythm of war had become a grim routine. Convoys crossed the Atlantic under constant threat. Bombers flew nightly over Europe, and the radio waves hummed with coded messages. Endless strings of letters that, to most ears, meant nothing. But inside Bletchley Park, those letters were becoming sentences, then orders, then lives. The Codebreakers had done the impossible. The Enigma machine, once thought unbreakable, was now a tool of Allied intelligence. Each day, more messages were being read. Each night, the results were sent to London under the classification Most Secret, Ultra. It was a phrase that came to mean one thing: information no one could ever know existed. Yet the power of Ultra came with a cost. Every time a message was decoded, the question arose: how could it be used without revealing its source? If the Germans realized Enigma had been broken, they would change the machine, and the window into their war would close forever. So the Allies made a choice, a moral one. They decided that secrecy mattered more than mercy. If a decrypted message revealed an upcoming attack, but acting on it would betray that the code was broken, the order was often to stand down. Let the attack happen. Lose the battle. Save the secret. For the men and women of Bletchley Park, that burden was unbearable. They could read messages detailing the routes of ships, the targets of bombers, the fates of thousands, and they could do nothing to stop it. Their work demanded silence, even when silence meant death. The intelligence that was used had to be disguised. When Allied forces struck an enemy convoy whose position had been revealed by Ultra, the action had to appear accidental, as though discovered by aerial patrol or chance encounter. Deception became a second language of survival. The moral toll was immense. Messages that couldn't be used were filed away, marked for eyes only. Operators learned not to ask what happened afterward. In the huts, they spoke little, worked endlessly, and carried their guilt quietly. Ultra's reach extended across every theater of war. In North Africa, it helped turn the tide against Rommel's Africa Corps, allowing the Allies to anticipate his supply routes. In the Atlantic, it became the unseen weapon that starved the German U-boats of coordination. In occupied Europe, it guided resistance networks, providing fragments of intelligence that saved lives in silence. The Germans never suspected. They believed their messages were sacred, sealed by mathematics and faith. They could not imagine that in a quiet English village, thousands of ordinary minds were unmaking their secrets. The structure of ultra-intelligence was a network within a network. Intercept stations scattered across Britain and the colonies captured transmissions around the clock. The messages were rushed by motorcycle and train to Bletchley Park, decrypted, translated, analyzed, and passed to the government code and cipher schools liaison units, who decided what could be used and how. The volume of information was overwhelming. It revealed not only military orders, but the rhythms of the enemy's life, the gossip of officers, the reports of weather stations, the supply shortages in distant divisions. From fragments of routine, the analysts built a map of the enemy's mind. This was intelligence on a scale the world had never seen. It allowed the Allies to wage war with foresight, but foresight required restraint. A single careless operation could have exposed everything. In 1943, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, Ultra's influence became decisive. The Codebreakers at Bletchley read daily reports of German troop movements, coastal defenses, and transport logistics. The information-shaped strategies that generals would never know came from them. Every battle plan, every convoy schedule, every deception was touched by the invisible hand of the Codebreakers. The irony was cruel. The people who knew the most about the war were the ones who would never speak of it. They could not tell their families what they had done. They could not write of their victories. They could only keep working as the war turned in their favor. Alan Turing's team continued to refine their machines. By now, dozens of bombs ran across Britain, devouring German traffic day and night. Turing himself worked increasingly in isolation, focused not just on the war, but on the future, on what these machines might become. He had already written the blueprint for a universal machine capable of performing any logical task. At Bletchley, that theory had found its first proof. But even as his creation helped save nations, he remained an enigma himself. He spoke little, cared less for rank, and lived by rules no one else understood. Those who worked beside him admired his brilliance, but feared his detachment. To Turing, logic mattered more than comfort, truth more than politeness. He was, as one colleague said, half man, half machine. Yet behind that coolness was compassion. He cared deeply for the men and women under his command, often staying long after shifts to help check data or adjust circuits. He laughed rarely but kindly. He kept a stuffed animal on his desk, a reminder of the humanity that logic could not erase. As the war moved toward its climax, Bletchley Park became both a fortress and a prison. Those who worked there rarely left. Mail was censored, phone calls forbidden. The outside world grew distant. Inside, everything revolved around ciphers, shifts, and secrecy. Even friendships existed within the limits of what could not be said. For those few who grasped the scale of their success, there was pride, but never celebration. Each decrypted message saved lives, but it also reminded them how many had been lost before the code was broken. Every victory came shadowed by what couldn't be prevented. In late 1944, the scope of ultra-intelligence reached its peak. With Enigma largely mastered, the Allies began reading high-level German military traffics almost as quickly as it was sent. They knew the positions of armies, the strength of divisions, the timing of withdrawals. By the time of the D-Day invasion, Ultra had already prepared the ground. The deception operations, the fake armies, false transmissions, and phantom divisions were coordinated with Ultron intercepts to mislead the enemy at every turn. When German generals believed the invasion would strike at Calais instead of Normandy, it was not luck. It was design. A design born in the quiet rooms of Bletchley Park. The landings succeeded not only because of courage and firepower, but because the enemy was fighting ghosts. Every movement, every defense, every decision they made was being watched through the glass of Ultra. The war that began with numbers was ending with knowledge. But that knowledge had to remain invisible. The secret that had saved millions could not be allowed to slip into rumor or recognition. When victory finally came in 1945, the Codebreakers did not celebrate openly. There were no parades for them, no medals pinned in public. Orders were given to destroy documents, dismantle machines, and erase evidence. The bombs were broken down for scrap. The files marked Ultra were locked in sealed cabinets. The people who had helped win the war were told to forget it. They obeyed. For decades, they kept their silence. Alan Turing returned to his research, the others to universities' classrooms and quiet lives. The secret remained buried beneath the myth of battlefield heroism. The war within the war had ended, not with a gunshot, but with a whisper. And in that whisper lay the foundation of the modern world. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the war that had consumed the world left behind ruins, ashes, and silence. For most, that silence was peace. For the men and women of Bletchley Park, it was duty. Their war had not ended with victory celebrations. It ended with the signature on the Official Secrets Act. They were forbidden to speak of what they had done, forbidden to even admit where they had served. The bombs were dismantled, their metal frames melted down, their wiring removed. The papers were burned, the archives sealed, the huts emptied. The greatest intelligence operation in history was erased almost overnight. For the public, the story of the war remained one of soldiers and generals, of battles and bravery. The quiet war of logic, the war that had turned chaos into order, disappeared from memory. The people who had fought it went home to ordinary lives, carrying the weight of extraordinary secrets. Alan Turing returned to Cambridge, then to the National Physical Laboratory in London. He continued to chase the same idea that had driven him through the war, the dream of a machine that could think. He wrote papers describing the concept of stored program computers, laying the foundation for the digital age. To his colleagues, he was still eccentric, still brilliant, still too far ahead of his time. But his government, the one he had helped save, saw him differently. In 1952, Turing was arrested and charged with gross indecency for being gay, a crime under British law. He was stripped of his security clearance, barred from further government work, and forced to undergo chemical treatment. The same man who had broken the unbreakable was now broken by his own country. 2 years later, he was found dead in his home, an apple by his bedside, half eaten. The official verdict was suicide. He was 41. The secrecy surrounding his wartime work meant few knew who he really was or what he had achieved. Newspapers remembered him as a mathematician, not a savior. The machine he built, the lives he saved, the war he helped end, all of it remained hidden behind walls of silence. For decades, the truth stayed buried. Even after the technology Turing inspired began reshaping the modern world, the details of his wartime contributions remained classified. The Enigma code-breaking effort, the ultra-intelligence program, the thousands of men and women who worked at Bletchley Park, none of them could speak. In the 1960s, as computers spread across universities and industries, Turing's theories found new life. But his name was still little known. It wasn't until 1974, nearly 30 years after the war, that the secret of Ultra was finally declassified. The story stunned the world. The scale of Bletchley Park's achievement was almost beyond comprehension. Historians estimated that the Codebreakers had shortened the war by at least 2 years, saving millions of lives. The decoding of Enigma had shaped every major campaign, from the Battle of the Atlantic to D-Day. The shadow war fought with gears, and logic had been as decisive as any fought with guns. And at the center of it all was Alan Turing, the quiet man whose mind had built the bridge between humanity and machine. In the years that followed, the legacy of Enigma became the legacy of the modern world. The techniques developed at Bletchley, pattern recognition, algorithmic logic, cryptographic analysis, became the foundations of computer science. The Codebreakers had not only ended one war, they had invented the tools that would define the next century. Every computer, every encryption system, every digital network traces its lineage back to those huts filled with paper, pencils, and patience. The machines that once read the secrets of war now power the age of information. What began as a desperate effort to decode the enemy became a revolution in how humanity understands intelligence itself. Bletchley Park itself fell silent after the war. The estate was abandoned, its buildings left to decay, its gardens overgrown. It stood forgotten, a ghost of the secret war that once pulsed within its walls. Only in the 1990s did efforts begin to restore it, led by historians and former workers who wanted the world to remember. Today, Bletchley Park stands as a museum. Its huts reconstructed, its machines rebuilt, its story finally told. Visitors walk through the same rooms where Turing once worked, hear the mechanical hum of the bomb, and see the rows of desks where clerks once turned chaos into order. The ghosts remain, but they are finally at peace. The story of the Enigma Code is not only about machines or mathematics. It is about people, about the quiet heroism of those who worked without recognition, who saved lives without medals, who fought a war that history almost forgot. It is about the moral cost of secrecy, the power of intellect, and the fragility of genius. Alan Turing's persecution stands as one of the darkest stains on modern history. It took more than half a century for his country to apologize. In 2009, the British government issued an official statement honoring him. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted him a royal pardon. But the apology, though sincere, came too late. Turing's true redemption lies not in royal decrees, but in the machines that hum in every corner of the modern world, the living continuation of his ideas. Every calculation, every algorithm, every coded message carries his shadow. He taught the world that thought itself could be built, that intelligence could live in circuits and logic. And he proved that even in the darkest moments of war, the quiet mind of one person can change the course of humanity. The Enigma machine was meant to hide truth forever. But in breaking it, Turing and his colleagues showed that no secret, no matter how perfect, can last forever. Truth finds a way to be known, through persistence, through reason, through the simple courage to keep thinking when the world demands silence. Their story is more than history. It is a reminder that knowledge is both the weapon and the hope of humankind. This was the secret war. This was the code that won it. And this is the unknown zone.